Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of this tutorial. In this part, I'll be continuing from where we left off in part 1, where we created the backend using Go and configured the routes for the user to register, log in, get the user information, and log out. So in the same parent folder, we are going to create a React app called frontend, and under frontend, we're going to create components and the screens folder, where we're going to have home screen, login screen, and the sign up screen. And the routes to each of those screens will be configured in app.tsx, and we're going to be using React Router for that. So if you haven't used React Router before, we can configure the routes to each of these paths and pass in the screen components for the corresponding path. We're also going to be using React Bootstrap, and it's a little bit different from Bootstrap, which is implemented with class properties. So React Bootstraps, we are using components themselves, like the button component here. We are also using useState and useEffect hooks. So if you do not have basic understanding of those, I recommend you go over a documentation or watch a video on those. We are using useEffect to fetch data from the backend upon rendering of the page, and we are also going to go over how we can use the states in the component itself in the form and submit them to the backend. This is how our application is going to look like. We do have a simple nav bar with links and a footer, and we're also going to have the sign up and login page. And when the user logs in, we are going to retrieve the cookie from the backend and authenticate the user to display the first name of the user on the home page. So let's get started now. Notice how we are in the parent folder. Here we can do, let me zoom in, npx create React app. I'm going to name it frontend and specify the Typescript template. Enter, and that's going to take a minute or two, and I'm going to let that load. So once the installation is complete, let me zoom out. We are going to have this React app created for us. So come down to this source folder. I'm going to get rid of all of these files that we are not going to be using. So just delete them. And then I'm going to come to index.tsx and get rid of this reference, as well as index.css and whatever we have down here. Save that. I'm going to come to app.css and get rid of everything in there. And back in app.tsx, I'm going to get rid of everything that's inside the return. Here, I'm simply going to say React app is working for now, just to make sure it's running. And of course, get rid of this reference to logo. And here we are going to be in the parent folder, so remember to cd into your React app, and then we can do npm run start. So once we have confirmed that the app is running on port 3000, come back to the source and create a folder called components. And under components, we are going to create the header component as well as the footer component. And to make it easier for us to create the components, come to extension if you're using VS Code and look for ES7 React Redux snippets. So snippets here, make sure you install that. So only when you have that installed, you can type out RAFCE like that and do an enter, RAFCE and enter. And that's going to create an arrow function component for us. So that makes everything easier. So for now, I'm going to put a placeholder text for the header and footer like that, just to show you that our components are working. And back in app.tsx, I'm going to import the header component from the header file and import the footer from components/footer, like that. So I'm going to wrap everything around in a bracket and place the header component there, as well as the footer. But you're going to see how we do have the red squiggly line. That's because we do have to wrap everything around a parent element, like that. Of course, this can be a div if you have it as a div, but I'm just going to leave it empty for now. So now we can see how we have the header and the footer component, and that React app is working. So the next thing we want to do is to install a Bootstrap theme. So come to this bootswatch.com and there would be a bunch of themes that you can install. So I'm going to be using Deluxe theme. So click download and bootstrap.min.css file. So the reason we want to install this is because we don't want to be writing out all that CSS throughout the application. So if I drag this into the source folder, we're going to have it here. Come down to index.tsx. Here, simply type import that bootstrap.min.css file. Okay, save that. And I also want to install React Bootstrap. So just enter. I'm going to zoom out again. And come down to header. So the next thing we want to do is to create this nav bar here. And we are going to be using React Bootstrap to create that nav bar. So once that is installed, come to this React Bootstrap website. Okay, so just Google React Bootstrap or something, and then click this first link here. Come to components, scroll down a little bit, come down to nav bar here. So I'm gonna copy this layout here, come to header, get rid of this inside the bracket and paste that. And if we want to use these components here, we do have to import those components from React Bootstrap, and we are going to be using nav bar and the button component. And I'm going to get rid of this nav dropdown here, as well as the form. And I actually need to import nav here as well. So let me save that and run my application again. I will be modifying the nav bar a little bit. So come back to the React app and let's see how the nav bar looks like. So now we do see a nav bar there. So I do want to modify this a little bit. Background to dark and variant to dark. I'm going to add this collapse on select. Here, I'm going to rename this to Go React Auth, change the href. Same here, this to sign up, login, href to sign up, and login. So once I save that, you see that change. And now we want to push these links to the right and also add some padding on the left and right side. So in order to do that, simply change this to MS Auto, save that, the links to the right, and I would also, actually I'm not using button here, my bad, I am actually importing container component from React Bootstrap. So right underneath nav bar, I'm gonna wrap everything around in a container. And now you see some padding on the left and right side of it. And now that we have the nav bar in place, let's go to footer. Here, I want to import container, row, and column from React Bootstrap. Get rid of what I had before. Inside these brackets, I am gonna wrap everything around the footer tag. In here, I'm gonna have the container, row, and column. Inside here, I'm just gonna say copyright, add the copyright icon and the name of my application, like that. Here, I do want to add some Bootstrap class in there to center the text and add some padding. Save that, and now we see the footer in place. And back in app.tsx, I also want to wrap everything around the container, inside the container. So from React Bootstrap. Okay, so here I forgot to add the word from. Here I would add a main tag and actually put this inside the main tag and wrap everything around inside the container. Save that, and now you see some padding on the left and right. And I do want to add some small CSS to this main tag here. So in app.css, just to make things clearer, I do want to add some margin on top and set the height and set the height to maybe 75 viewport height. Save that. So now that we have some height on the main element here, we have the footer placed at the bottom. So if we take a look at the application, we display that React app is working, and when we click on these links, it does redirect us to the login and the sign up page, but it doesn't actually redirect us to any other screen because we do have to create them. So under source, I'm going to create this screens folder, a home screen file, a login screen, and the sign up screen. Again, for each of these screens, I am gonna place a placeholder text saying this is a home screen. Come to the login screen and say this is a login screen. Save that. Same for the sign up screen. This is a sign up screen. Okay, save that. And in app.tsx, I want to set up the router. So if you remember from the presentation slide, we are going to set up the routes to different paths and pass in the screen components for the corresponding path. So in order to do that, let me zoom in. I'm going to install React Router DOM and also the Typescript version of that. So simply type this out, router DOM, and do an enter. Zoom out. Here in app.tsx, I'm going to import browser, router, and route from React Router DOM. And I'm going to rename browser router as router so I can use the component with that name and wrap everything around the router. One important thing is that any route has to come inside the router or the browser router. So here inside the container, I'm going to get rid of this h1 and create the route, specify the path and the component. Here I'm going to pass in home screen. And of course, in order to use that component, I have to import home screen from components slash, actually not components, it's from screens folder, home screen. Same for the login screen. Okay, screens, login screen, and the sign up screen. Screens, sign up screen. I'm going to copy these routes twice. Here, path to the sign up page, I'm going to pass in the sign up screen. And for login screen. Save that and let's run the application. So the first thing you notice, it says this is a home screen and this is a sign up screen. So one thing we have to add here is the word exact. Let me save that again. This way, we only display the home screen when we are in this path specifically. Okay, so in the home screen, we display the home screen, and sign up screen, we display the sign up screen. And when we are directed to the login page, we have the login screen in place. So the React router is working. And the next thing we want to do, we want to create the forms in the login screen and the sign up screen. We are going to be using React Bootstrap. So how it's going to look like is this. Okay, sign up and login page. So go to React Bootstrap components section, come down to forms. Okay, again, I'm going to copy this layout here. In the login screen, erase that in the brackets. I'm going to paste that there. And I'm going to import the form and a button from React Bootstrap. So there is a few things that I want to get rid of. First one is this form.group. I'm going to get rid of this checkbox form.group. And also this form.text here. Get rid of that. And modify this a little bit. I'm going to change this control ID and say enter your email. Same for the password. And just leave that as password. So save that. Okay, so now we do have the form in place. But there's one more thing I want to add, which is the form container component. Okay, I don't have this component yet, but once I have that, I am gonna wrap everything around inside the form container. So with that form container, this form is gonna look like this. So I'm gonna center everything and etc. So under components folder, let's create this form container. So here, RAFCE, and I'm gonna import container row and column from React Bootstrap. In here, get rid of that. Everything inside container, row, and column. And inside the column, I'm going to pass the children in there. I do want to add some simple Bootstrap classes in here, add some padding, and justify center, actually justify content, and here for responsive widths. So since we are passing children here, we do have to receive children from as a parameter. So I'm going to save that, and in the login screen, I'm going to import form container from components folder and form container. But once I save that, I'm going to see an error. I'm actually going to see a TypeScript error saying that binding element children implicitly has an any type. So come back to form container. It's saying that we do have to specify the type of the children. So when you come across those kind of problem, simply Google children React TypeScript or something along that line and come down to Stack Overflow, and you're going to see how the type of children is React.React node. So we do have to specify the type of children, and intuitively you might think we can do something like this. But the most common way people approach this is by defining this functional component and passing in the type as its generic type. So something like this. And this is one way to do it, and this works fine. Okay, once I refresh, okay, it kind of works. But if you actually Google React TypeScript cheat sheet, there is a React TypeScript cheat sheet repo. You scroll down a little bit, you're going to see how they say why React.fc is discouraged. And it kind of explains why, how it is different from the normal function, and saying like function component is explicit about the return type, etc. You can read this at your own leisure, and it now talks about the normal functions and all. So you define the type or the interface, app props, and just pass it along with the parameter. So I'm going to go with that approach. I'm going to get rid of this here. I want to define this interface props, and in here I'm going to define the type of children, and right after the children I'm going to pass the interface there. So next time if you have any other parameter, let's say first name here, you can simply come to the interface and add that field here and specify the type like that, and it's not going to complain. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that and this, save that, come back to the application, and now everything is working fine. And back in the login screen, I do want to add an H1 saying this is a login page, and add some margin between each input fields. So I'm going to copy this here, come here, paste that, same for the button, save that, so the login page is in place. Now let's go with the sign up screen. I'm going to copy this entire login screen, come to the sign up screen, get rid of that. Inside the brackets, I'm going to paste that. So I'm going to import form container from components form container, and import form and a button from React Bootstrap. Save that. I'm gonna change this H1 to sign up, and I do have two more input fields for signing up because I do want the first name and the last name from the user. So here, first name, enter your first name. Same here, it's gonna be last name, and this to last name, and say enter your last name. All right, last name. Okay, let's go into the sign up page. And now we have the sign up page in place. So now back in the home screen, okay, let's just add an H1 here saying welcome to the home page. Save it. Okay, so now we have everything, all the pages in place. The next thing we want to do is add states for each of the components. Let's start with the login screen. So in order to add the states, we are going to be using useState hook from React. I would need an email state like this with an empty string as its default value. Same for password and useState like that. The reason we need the email and password useState or states is because we are going to be using each of the states for each of the input fields. So when we are logged in, we need a state for this input field and one for the password here. And how are we going to set the value of these states? We can do that inside form.control. So here, I'm gonna track on change and receive on event. And we can access the value of that field through target.value. Okay, what's going on here? Actually, let's complete this for you. Set email and pass that value inside set email. So what's going to happen here, when the user types in something, it's going to track the changes, and we can access the value through the event.target.value. So the value here is accessed through this e.target.value, and we are going to set the email using the value from the input. And that's going to set the value of this email state here. So I'm going to pass this email variable under value. So when the user actually submits this form here, it's going to pass the value to wherever we direct it to on submit. So later we're going to add something on submit and then pass in a function there. But you're going to see this later. So let me just complete this for you. So same thing here, pass the value, and on change, set password, target.value, like that. Okay, save that. So just to make things clear, once these values are set, like I just said, we're gonna submit that to a not to a, but we're gonna handle that submit using submit handler, and we're gonna create this submit handler function up here like that, and then receive an event, and this event is gonna be of synthetic event. This is the type of the event, and of course you can do a Google search like how we did for the children object. So here we see how it's imported from React. We can do e.prevent default to prevent submission and save that. Here I'm just gonna say submit it just as a placeholder. All right, so now our states are set, and later inside the submit handler, we are gonna interact with the backend. Using fetch. That's what we are gonna do later in the login screen. But let's complete the sign up screen first. Okay, so I'm gonna copy useState here and paste it inside the sign up screen component. Of course, I do have to import useState from React, and I would need 2 more states in the sign up screen. For the first name, set first name and last name, because again we are gonna need these states for each of the input fields. Set last name. So we are gonna do the same thing we did for the login screen. I'm gonna copy this here and then paste it for the form.control of the first name. Set first name, same for the last name. Value would be last name, and we're gonna set last name here. Same for the email. My bad. And password. Here, password, and we set password. Save that. Okay, and let's complete this sign up screen first. So form on submit, we are gonna handle that using the submit handler here, and create this submit handler like that, and receive an event. Would be synthetic event. Make sure this thing is imported here. Okay, e.prevent default. And again, we want to interact with the backend. Okay, interact with the backend, and we are gonna use the fetch method and pass in the URL as its first parameter. So we have the backend running on port 8081, and we have the register API/register URL configured in the backend. So that would be, so fetch accepts the request info, which is the URL, and in the second part we are gonna be passing in the type of the method. So it will be post headers, where I specify application/JSON, and the body. And we do want to pass the body in the JSON format. So what I would do is JSON stringify, and inside these brackets and squiggly brackets, I am then gonna send the first name, last name, email, and password like this. And before we continue, we do have to make this function async because of this fetch method. Okay. Save that. Alright, before we test this out, there's one more thing we want to add here, which is history.push, to redirect the user to a different page once the fetch has been handled. So under here, I'm going to do history.push. And in order to use this object, I do have to receive that from here. And just like how we did for the children, I'm going to define the interface props, and not children, but history, the type of the history. So it's going to be route component props history here. And this is going to be imported from React router. Okay. So again, I'm going to define a history with the interface props. So that's all we needed for the sign up screen. So let's go and see if this actually works. And in order to test this out, I have to run the backend. So I'm going to open up another terminal and cd into backend. Here I'm going to do go run main.go. Okay, so I have these 4 paths available for us. Okay, and I'm going to open up MySQL Workbench just to show you what users I have so far. Okay, so the last user here is davidhuang8@gmail.com. And now let's try and see if I can sign up with a new user. So again, the name will be David Huang, and the email address is going to be davidhuang9@gmail.com, and pass in a random password there and submit. Okay, now we are redirected to the login page. We can also see this was successful. Okay, let's go and see our database. Open that up. Now we can see how we have the new user with the email. But you're going to see how we don't have the first name and last name there. That's because we didn't add or specify the name of this field in the JSON format. This is specific to my application because on the backend, I defined these fields to be first underscore name and last underscore name. So because of how our backend is made, I needed to specify the name in the JSON format. Okay, so once I fix that, that's going to work. Save that. Let's move on to the login screen. So in the submit handler, we do want to do pretty much the same thing we did in the sign up screen. There it's going to be slightly different though. So copy this entire fetch method here and paste it here. We are not going to be passing in first name and last name. And we also have to make this function async. Okay, the first thing we're going to change is the API route. Here we are going to pass API/login. And there's one line we have to add. This is very important, which is credentials include. Okay, save that. The reason we need that is because when the user logs in, this is my presentation slide. So as I showed you earlier, we are going to receive the JWT cookie from the backend when the user logs in. And by default, it's not going to include the cookie in the HTTP body. So in order to receive this JWT from the backend, we do need to specify include credentials. So same here, once the user logs in, I want to redirect the user to the home page. So I'm going to do the same thing here, pass in history and props, specify the types in props, create this interface props here. History would be type route component props history. Okay, save that. Okay, let's run backend again. Go run main.go. And make sure your front end is running like that. Okay, and let's go back to the application. I'm going to open up developer tool, refresh. Okay, just to make sure that we receive the JWT from the backend. So here, I'm going to log in with this new email address and submit. Okay, now we can see how we received the cookie from the backend and we are logged in. So the login and the sign up is working fine. So the next thing we want to do is display the first name of the user that is logged in and also change these links to log out. And in order to do that, we have to get the user information. And I'm going to do that in app.tsx here. And in app.tsx, I will be using the fetch again, await fetch. And we can't just call await fetch like that. And in our example, we are going to be using useEffect to fetch the data upon rendering of the page. So we define useEffect like that and put an arrow function inside that. And intuitively, we would think we can do await fetch here and make this function async. But that's not going to work just because of how useEffect works. So we do have to create an immediately invoked function like that. And this is also called IIFE. So inside here, I can create the async function like that, an arrow function. And inside this async function, I'm going to create or add this fetch method. And just like before, I'm going to specify the path. And our path that we created on part 1 was API/user to get the user information. And again, I do not have to specify the type of the method. I just have to specify the headers as application/JSON. And important thing here, credentials to be included like that. Okay, save that. So after we fetch from the backend, how are we going to use the value or the data that we retrieve? In order to do something with the data, we have to define a variable called response and then do response.json and store that in another variable called data. But this JSON returns a promise, so we do have to make this like this. And from the data field, we can access the first name there. Okay, so we do want to save this somewhere. And that's when we need use state. Okay, so inside this component, I'm just going to define the first name state in our example. Use state like that. Okay, and I can use that set first name function to save that value inside the first name state here. Okay, and we can pass the first name value to the home screen. We do have to modify this a little bit like this, where I create an arrow function so that I can pass the first name to the home screen. So I'm going to save that, and of course I'm going to come back to home screen, and I will be receiving first name here. Again, I have to define the type here of the first name through props. So just create this interface props, and first name would be of type string. And inside the home screen component, I'm going to add a bracket and check if first name exists. If it exists, that means that the user is logged in. So here I can say, welcome, first name, welcome David. Okay. If it's not logged in, I'm going to copy this and just display welcome to the homepage here. So to test this out, let's actually close this and do npm run start again. Okay, so let's start new. Okay, so I'm gonna restart my backend as well. Go run main.go. And let's create a completely different user, David Huang, now with davidhuang10@gmail.com, QWE123 as our random password. Okay, so now we have created the new user. Now let's try to log in with the new user. Submit. Okay, now it displays welcome to the homepage. And we'll see one issue. We do have to refresh the page in order to have this displayed here. And in order to resolve that issue, we actually have to pass this setFirstName method around in app.tsx. So just like how we passed in the first name state into a different component, we have to pass this method around because we are not using Redux to manage state globally. But before we do that, let's actually pass in the first name to the nav bar so that we can display the logout link accordingly. Okay, just like how we did for the home screen. So pass in the first name into the header. I'm going to move into the header and define first name and create the interface props again. So define interface props where first name is of type string. And inside here, okay, right above nav, I'm going to check if first name exists. And if it doesn't exist, that means the user is not logged in. I'm going to pass this here. Okay, and if the user is logged in, I want to display the logout link. So logout, and I don't need the href in the logout because we are going to be on the same page. Okay, I'm going to save that real quick. And now we see the logout link there, now that the user is logged in, right? So when the user clicks logout, on click, I do want to handle the logout. Because once the user logs out, we want to get rid of the cookie that exists in the browser. So I need to create this logout handler inside the component, just like how we did with the other screens. So here, I'm going to receive an event of type synthetic event. Get rid of that here. e.prevent default. And we are going to be using the fetch method as just like before. Like here, so here I would do await fetch from localhost 8081 and we have the path to log out, okay, which is gonna get rid of our cookie. And inside here, I am simply gonna pass in the header, and most importantly, the credentials to be included, like that. So I need to make this handler async. Save that. So it's throwing an error because I have to make this C a capital letter. Okay, once that is saved, refresh. Now we can see the logout button, and when the user logs out and refresh, now we can see the welcome to the home page. All right, so let's get back to that issue with refreshing the page. Okay, so back in app.tsx, I was saying how we have to pass set first name method around. So in here, I'm going to pass in the set first name method here. And back in the header, I'm going to receive that method. Okay, set first name would be a method that returns void, and it actually receives a string value here. So with the set first name method, inside the logout handler, when the user logs out, I'm going to set first name to an empty string. Save that. And now let's start everything from the start. Okay. I do have to save app.tsx. Okay, so that is saved. And let's start from the very beginning. Okay, we are going to log in with the new user that we created earlier. Okay, 1, 2, 3, submit. The user is logged in, and we can see the token here. Okay, now it says welcome to the home page. We do have to refresh the page to see this, and for that, just do the same thing for the login screen. Okay, in app.tsx, you have to pass the set first name to the login screen. Okay, but when you log out, now we can see the welcome to the homepage sign, and the token has disappeared. So our Go React Auth page is working. Not everything is working, but I did go over everything that I wanted to share in this video. So just for recap, I wanted to go over how you can set up screens and components like that, and set up the React router to route different components to different paths. And we did go over how we can use React Bootstrap in our React applications, and how we use useState and useEffect hooks. You see how in our login and sign up screen, we used states like this and set the values in the forms and pass them into the body when we are fetching from the backend. So I covered a lot, and I understand it can be confusing because I didn't go over everything in detail. But I hope you guys found this video helpful. And in the following videos, I will be going over how we can set up Redux in our application so that we don't have to go through all that hassle passing first name and set first name around in different components. Because with Redux, you can have states globally, and that resolves all the issues that we have had throughout the application. Alright, that will be it for this video. Thank you all guys for watching.